Financial governance, what do investors want? Please allow me to invite on the dais Mr. N. Venkatram, Chairman, CII National Committee on Financial Reporting. Sir, can we have you on the dais, please? Please allow me to welcome Ms. Monica Kalia, Deputy Managing Director and CFO, National Bank for Funding for Infrastructure and Development. Ma'am, can we have you here on the dais? Request everyone to please settle in. Mr. Mark Billington, Managing Director, International, ICAEW. Mr. Rajesh Mittal, President and Managing Director, Isuzu Motors India Private Limited. Mr. Rushikesh Mehta, Senior Vice President, Financial Services, Open Network for Digital Commerce. Last but not the least, we have Mr. V. Swaminathan, Head Corporate Audit and Assurance, Godrej Industries Limited. Handing over to you, sir.
It's a pretty odd format for a panel. Maybe let's go on a bit of a curve. Or do you think it's a problem? Oh, making a fake announcement that there was a break. There is no break. Please get back in the room. Can we have everyone back in, please? Shobit? Phone a friend? Just get everyone inside. We can start. We can start? Get the front line. Well, welcome to our first session, which is around financial governance. What do investors want? It's a very well-prepared session, I must confess, because we actually all got together and discussed it before we came on stage. So I do hope you have an engrossing time. But of course, the good thing about discussing things up front is you can ask different questions when you're on stage as well. And that's not what I'm proposing to do, but I'm hoping that's where the trend goes. I think that this is, as I said, a logical next step to what we said in the inaugural session, so I'm not going to trouble you with another speech. Maybe what I would do is first go around and maybe we can just start for an introduction about you, your company and your first thoughts, and then we can probably just frame the questions as well. So I'll start with you.
So hi, good morning everyone. I'm Rushikesh Mehta and I work at ONDC, which is the Open Network for Digital Commerce. I spent most of my career at TransUnion Sybil, so a very heavily regulated organization, and spent about the last 5 years in digital public goods. How many of you have heard of ONDC? That would help me. Okay, so a fair amount. Okay, so I'll talk more about the operating issues and the disruption that comes from this, and we've had a lot of investors, we get invited to a lot of conferences to talk about what we're doing and the impact it's going to have. But in its essence, what ONDC does is it unbundles marketplaces, right? It's the next generation and trying to create a level playing field. So if I had to describe ONDC in 2 sentences, it's markets for sellers, choice for buyers. The way we do this is by creating standardized APIs that connect demand and supply. The reason for doing this is basically to counter the dominance of big tech, because that has adverse influences, especially on buyer choice and on the well-being of sellers in general. And the second order effect is also to to deepen the markets for the country. And what does this mean? Is can a masala, a lady who's making masalas in Satara district be able to sell it to a person in Delhi or in Bangalore and do it digitally, right? So that's the e-commerce angle. We've also done APIs for credit, insurance, and mutual funds. The idea is to deliver sachet products at scale to the country, other than the 100 million that are getting served today. And I think, I'll just do a very brief description of the kind of disruption that is coming, and then, hand it back. But look, if you see what's happened with Swiggy, Zomato, we always say that two marketplaces like a duopoly usually creates what we call a monopsony, which is almost a single buyer market. This puts a lot of pressure on the sellers, and there's extraction of rent, as there should be, I guess, if there are only two players, which are 30 to 40, 50% commissions. The second order effect is they usually backward integrate, and you've probably heard about this in the last month or so, where Swiggy, Zomato are doing their own private label food manufacturing, and this is contrary to what was they kind of expressed to the the restaurants when they had started this. Now look, they are doing what they are supposed to do. The restaurants obviously now have an existential crisis because these marketplaces tend to have all the data of their customers, but the restaurants don't. So now I think it's going to become the watershed moment for the food and grocery side for ONDC, and when the industry embraces what is the ability to survive in an environment where they go up against a lot of capital, right? So that is one form of disruption. Obviously, the dominant incumbent gets disrupted, but it also helps create options for the people who don't have that dominance in the market. The other thing we are doing, and I'll just touch upon it, that could be disruptive is, look, anything we do that democratizes access to supply or demand becomes disruptive for dominant incumbents, especially. So what we see happening as transactions start, and we have about 15 million transactions a month, then it becomes boardroom discussions for a lot of people. And what we find is a lot of boards don't fully understand what we're doing, and it takes long-term commitment. I think that was touched upon earlier. There's lots of short-term focus, especially for listed companies, on where should I deploy capital. And that then leaves the long-term sort of in limbo. So I think addressing that, understanding what is going to come in the future, and then participating as option value when it does explode, and I don't say if it does explode, I say when, because there's national will to get this done, and we don't do it any differently than any startup, right? So, yes, we are a government-backed org, but we have a hypothesis, we build something, we find something doesn't work, we iterate it till it ends up working. And finally, I'll give you another example before I hand over is, like, I'm sure you'll have heard of the central bank digital currency, and it's there as a nebulous concept, and yes, there's some stuff going on in the background. Like, I'm happy to make a prediction that will be the next big disruption to payments, because there are two attributes of it that make it or three actually, that make it very powerful. It's programmable. So it's also almost like it can replace eNACH e-mandate, right? It's like a digital check. Secondly, it's free. There's going to be no cost, right? And thirdly, settlements are instant. So and we are going to use this eventually at ONDC. We're working with the RBI to do it as well. Imagine what that will do to the payments industry, right? So you had NEFT, IMPS, then you have RTGS, then you had UPI, you have credit cards, and now you're going to have another version of it which is completely free. So imagine being able to wipe out payment gateway costs for where actually those costs limit the ability to make a transaction smaller, and the strongest use case is in mutual funds, for those who are familiar with that. So there's a lot of disruption coming, and I think it's very important for those on boards to be able to understand what is coming next and invest adequately in like growing with that change, because otherwise what tends to happen is you just miss the boat, which happened with a lot of large institutions with UPI. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rishikesh. I think that, you sort of summarized it saying the best things in life are free, and the rest of the ad of MasterCard goes away, right? They won't use MasterCard, but they'll use the digital rupee. Over to you, Mr. Swaminathan.
A very good morning to all of you. Thank you, CII and Venkat, for this opportunity. I head the audit for the Godrej Group. My responsibilities include audit, risk, controls, and compliance. Been with the group for over 3 decades. A group which is pioneered into governance and very strong governance culture over several decades. It's over 100, 125-year-old group. Right, Mr. Godrej has been very particular in terms of bringing about all levels of governance in the group, and we've seen it over several decades that the group prospered with a strong ethical and compliant background. So I also been very happy to be associated with the CIA for many years, and under the leadership of Venkat, we've been actually learning and translating these learnings across the various forums that I represent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and this doesn't. I reserve the right to ask you a couple of questions. Yeah. Over to you, Monica ji.
Hi, good morning, all of you. My name is Monica Kalia. I am Deputy Managing Director with the newest DFI of Government of India, that is National Bank for Funding Infrastructure and Development. We are fifth AIFI in a row by government, and we came into existence through an Act of Parliament in 2021. So relatively new institution as against my previous speaker who has been there for centuries. So personally, okay, I'm not professionally 2-year-old. I have been there in the industry for around 3 decades now, and primarily a banker. And in this new National Bank for Funding Infrastructure, just I'll give you a brief because it came by way of Act of the Parliament. It is, of course, 100% owned by Government of India as of now. So we have twin objectives. So first objective comes by way of developing an ecosystem for crowding in funding for the infrastructure development in India. And that includes deepening of bond markets and derivative markets. And the second objective which comes is funding to the infrastructure sector. So these are the twin objectives with which we are working on. So this forum is ideally very, very apt for us because we are there to create that ecosystem, and we have all seen what infra sector has gone through in the past decade, and it went up, came down, now it is again rising up. And we do understand that no nation can progress at the pace what India is aspiring to grow at without deeper investments into the infrastructure sector. And we would have seen that even in this year's budget also, the infrastructure spend has already increased. So every 1 rupee spent on the infra is, actually gives you a 3.25 rupees, multiplier in the GDP. And this is what we are trying to help. Primarily, most of the investment in the infrastructure sector has been done by Government of India. But now is the time for it to, bring in the private sector partnerships. And I think during the course of discussion, we will, see more on, what we are trying to do. You would have heard many series of news articles about NAFED these days coming around. And we have been talking about partial credit enhancements, and we have been talking about mini bonds, we have been talking about urban development. So I think during the course of discussions, we can touch upon all those things. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Mark?
Thank you, Venkat. And I think everyone's heard enough from me, but if I just reflect on this, what do investors want from an ICAW perspective, it's that our members and our institute provide the rules of the game of the econ to allow investors to have the confidence to invest in what they see to be sustainable businesses, and then to help keep those businesses sustainable.
Thank you. Rajesh? This is just a brief introduction and a bit of the thrust. You can make some opening remarks.
So I am Rajesh Mittal. I belong to a Japanese MNC called Isuzu Motors. If some of you are, I am one of the odd men also. If some of you are not familiar, Isuzu is the largest CV manufacturers from Japan. It sells in 136 countries. And from India, we are the largest exporters of commercial vehicles. So, and I am President and Managing Director of Isuzu, a proud Indian to be leading a Japanese company first time. And basically, Isuzu is known for its fairness in governance and disclosure. and from years together they are growing in giving dividends to the shareholders, and they really enjoy very good trust. So when I'll come to my turn to share, I'll share 4 points which investors should look at in any company's financial performance, which can make you understand that this company is going on an ethical path and building trust or not. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think that one common thread that comes through is the ecosystem, right? I mean, each one of you is building out on the ecosystem in your own way, some for over a century. I mean, of course, she attributed a couple of centuries to you, that's fine. But, but no, that's okay. But, yeah. But I think that the whole concept of value creation is the very purpose of why we exist. But I think the whole time frame is changing now with what's happening. It's no longer just a question of short term. We're looking at long term, but long term itself is becoming so wobbly that I think there is a tendency for us to also say what happens in the shorter term as we go to the long term. So maybe let's just discuss this whole issue of value creation as you see it in the ecosystems you create. And Rajeshji, since you had the 4 points, I'll start with you.
Okay. So first, any company's performance is visible from the consistency. So you are a good company, but you become great when for years together, if you continue to perform well. Isuzu is now more than 100-year-old company, and they have given very good consistent performance. So that comes not only by looking at the profits, but you have to also disclose what kind of risk you see in the business. And Japanese, or specifically Isuzu, is known for showing the worst part of the risk, because they believe that it is better to tell what can go wrong, and then always outperform. So whatever they say, they do much better performance than that. So that builds the trust in the investors. That can be one good strategy one can adopt, that you should share the worst situation to the investor and then do better. Don't over-promise and under-deliver, but under-promise and over-deliver. That is one good disclosure they do. Second thing, we can learn about sharing the opportunities. Like I have always seen, like due to competitive law, you can't exactly tell what is your capex or what is the future products you are launching. But at least you can indicate that you are investing in the future products, what is the direction you are taking. Like if you see our balance sheet now, we are indicating that we are working on hydrogen fuel cell for future, or we are bringing the latest technology going forward for making the green. This is the first point I wanted to make, that consistency in the performance, the risk disclosure, and the future opportunities is the first point you should look as investor. Second most important thing is how are you working on the softer aspects like sustainability goals or societal impact. So for example, Isuzu has declared that in 2045 will be carbon neutral, will have zero emission from our products or our industry or our way of working. Second thing, we have signed for 8 SDG goals out of 17. So those kind of disclosure in the balance sheet conveys to you that how progressive is the company, and are you really working for sustainability goals? Do you have some credible KPIs which you can monitor year after year? So that is my second point. Third point is, like we want to become 10 trillion economy going forward. That cannot happen only by the Indian investors. So we need FDIs, we need foreign direct investments, and that can only come, like since I am getting money from Japan for Indian company, so that can only happen when government as well as corporate take the responsibility of becoming FDI successful. Because if we give big promises of incentives or various other schemes from the government, and if we don't fulfill, then FDIs won't be interested to continue. And the local corporates who are joining hands with FDIs, they have a responsibility to make them successful. Normally, some of the Indian companies try to learn from them and say bye-bye to them. So that doesn't attract further foreign direct investment. Like they have trusted an Indian person to lead a Japanese company because they believe in us, and if we give that kind of faith to them or trust to the FDIs, then more investment will be attracted. That was my third point. And the last point I would like to say is, due to this emerging technologies. So like we have a lot of digital in finance and we are using a lot of IT. So there has to be a sufficient disclosure on your investment on cyber security, or how are you going to prevent the investors' interest? Because if compliance is not done properly, or if you are not protecting the interests of the investor, then it can lead to, again, a big fraud or type 1 error or type 2 error. So these are the 4 points I wanted to make, which I learned from this Japanese company who really believe in ethics and fairness towards the investor.
Thank you. Very, very insightful. And I'll go back to you, Monica, in terms of the fact that you say a lot of infrastructure is PPP. I think I'd also pick up on the point of FDI to say there is a requirement of FDI in infrastructure. And thirdly, something that's been perplexing and mystifying us for several decades, how do you deepen the bond market? So perhaps with those three in mind, how do you think that we can, create an environment by which investors feel more comfortable?
So, I like to pick up a few things, starting from, domestic, and then the FDI. I think he already touched about very important point of, consistencies in the policies of the government, and I think that is a key point for the FDI to stay in India. So, looking at the domestic, so if I just talk about the infrastructure investment, it's mostly been coming from the banking sector or any project you take up in the infra, it is typically 25% of the equity and 75% is the debt. So debt is coming from the banking sector and the NBFCs who are specifically for that infrastructure funding. So now the question comes, there are a handful of developers in the country. Maybe we talk about 10, 20, we can, just take them on our fingers and say that these are the developers who are working in this sector. Then howsoever amount of capital we may infuse into the banking sector on the NBFC, the exposure norms are going to hit of Reserve Bank of India. So, none of the developer may be able to develop new projects for the country whenever it hits the exposure norms. So the question then comes, where does the money come from? So look at the domestic sector now, the insurance and the pension funds, which is the social security of the country, which the citizen of the country is investing in. It is growing at double the speed of the growth in the CASA deposits of the banking sector. And the AUMs of this sector is almost at half of the CASA deposits of the banking sector. What does that mean? That the low-cost deposits which were available with the banking sector earlier may not be available at the same pace to this sector. So what happens is the other sector which is having a patient capital, they typically insurance, the pension fund, they require a investment which gives them an avenue of 20 years, 25 years. And at the same time, these infra-sector projects, they are long gestation projects and they are typically wanting that money for around 20 years, 25 years. We have seen the concession agreements or the PPP agreements that last for 20, 25 years. So how to match these two? And when we talk about matching these two, so that is where we are coming with something like we ourselves give a long tenure first of all. So we are giving, my 60% of the book consists of tenures which is more than 15 years. And we do offer fixed rate of interest also in case somebody is interested in. But then the major thing comes up is the, what we are talking about is partial credit enhancement. What we have seen in the insurance and the pension sector, almost, 97% of their investments are made either in the government security market or in a AAA rated bond. Now, if that is the comfort level of insurance and the pension sector, what can we do to bring more issuers in the bond market which has a AAA rating or at least a AA rating up to which the insurance sector is allowed to invest in? So that is coming by way of a partial credit enhancement from NAFID. That is the recent announcement of the union budget. So what we are typically doing is we are saying the first loss guarantee will be taken over by us. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that the loss is sitting in my book. It means I am doing a proper credit assessment of that proposal. I am doing a review and monitoring of that proposal to give that confidence to the investor who is holding that instrument which is enhanced partially by me. And that also means that I will give up a report maybe every half yearly or something which talks about what is the performance of this sector. Second part which comes through what you talk about the foreign investment. So already if we see the kind of market which is changing into InvIT structures or even the renewable energy sector, there are Canadian pension funds, there is, British pension funds, there is Abu Dhabi pension funds. They are all coming into the India. Why they are coming into the India in this sector specifically, if we apply our mind, this is basically that typically in the road sectors, we have been able to set our concession agreements right. We have been able to demonstrate that if something goes wrong, we are able to substitute it very fast, and we are able to, secure the value of the asset what we have. We are not just letting it go by that, it's wasted for many, many years. That is very important. The pace of substitution and pace of resolution in case something goes wrong. So that is what we have been able to demonstrate. Even in, we would have seen that some of the states PPA went wrong, and courts decided, no, this is not right. You go back and pay what you had committed to. So that is the consistency which is coming from the country. That is, I think, will pave way for more FDIs to come into the country.
Thanks. I think that the biggest competition that we get, ironically, is actually from the United States of America, because it's sometimes more tempting for people to just stay with investing in the US. And, I believe the latest debate now is really on the long-term capital gains as well. And as you know, the bonds itself have always suffered the issue of taxes and...
So incidentally, actually, a few days back only, we had a visit to the investors in the United States typically. So what they are looking at is, the interest arbitrage that they used to get. They are not getting that interest arbitrage between the US yields and the Indian yields, and typically the currency risk what they are holding, they are not able to make that delta what they want to make. So they are even willing to come to a lower rated instrument, which if credit enhanced by, say, institutional like NAFID, because they need that delta. Otherwise, they're saying we are not probably willing to come to India. So that is, good part of India, that we are able to, reduce that, margin or the arbitrage which earlier the yield markets used to give. But the typical part is that, of course, it reduces the FDI which may flow into India. But so far what we have done, we are on both sides of the market, like we are issuing bonds ourselves also. So far we have issued, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years bonds, and we have not faced any problem in raising that bonds from the Indian market itself. But of course it is good to diversify to the different markets, stay there also, because you never know whenever the times are right, and you may be able to raise the money from there.
Thank you. And Mr. Swaminathan, you're the T of trust, right?
Yes.
So the question here was, something similar to what I had said in the opening remarks. And I think what was touched on by other speakers as well, in terms of the amount of capital formation that is required. And since this is CII and it's something that we often debate over there as well, and the finance minister brought it up recently, even in the ET summit, about the fact that private investment has to increase, that there's a lot being done on public investment. There's a lot of praise for the startups, but somehow there's a sort of a gentle, I think it's more than a nudge, it's now getting more of a poke to say, is the private sector going to invest more? Is there going to be more capex?
Yeah.
So what do your investors think about in terms of your expansion? What is holding you back? Is it the fact that you worry that, there'll still be Chinese dumping? Across the board, I'm not talking just in your industry, but
So,
is industry holding back, and if so, why?
No. So we are seeing that industry is not really holding up. There is a lot of capex investments that are happening, but with a little amount of caution to say that, okay, what is going to be the visibility in terms of capacity expansions. So earlier we used to invest looking forward at 10-year growth numbers. Now with the uncertainty that is happening in the Chinese markets, the uncertainty that is happening in the US markets, the vision is 5 years. It's not that I want to invest today to meet my demands 10 years down the line. So that kind of investment is little slowed down, but yes, meaningful capex investment is still happening, and the private sector is still bullish about India and its growth story, and we are seeing this across sectors.
Would you like to add on some of the other points which we had discussed?
Okay. So, on the financial governance piece, and something that I'm quite passionate about, I was so delighted to hear Mark when in his opening remarks when he talked about 3 important aspects of ethical leadership, sustainable leadership, and a regulatory leadership. I wanted to add a few more facets to the whole financial governance piece, and that's on the board leadership and the value that the independent directors bring into the board and the directions that the board takes in terms of how an organization presents itself with its growth story, and a strong compliance culture, which is very important, both in terms of the regulatory compliances and the audit and control compliances. It's very important that the numbers that get presented to the investor is credible, is acceptable, and they have faith in the leadership that the growth trajectory works on. So it's very important that we build on these 4 or 5 pillars that each of the organizations that we represent. I sit through these investor calls and keenly watch what the investors are looking at. And some of these aspects very clearly come out in their discussions. Their expectation is be absolute transparent. I just want to kind of pose a point and stop there. In one of our Godrej properties was doing an investment, and they were doing an acquisition rather. And Mr. Piritra Godrej was very bullish about doing this investment. And the board discussed it in great detail and approved it. But when he presented to the investors were not very happy with that kind of acquisition. And a bold decision that he took after the meeting was to call off that acquisition. And the statement very clearly post the decision that he took was that I value my investor confidence more than anything else. If they feel that we are not doing it in the right direction, it's better that we abandon the acquisition. So, it's very important that we send out the right message, a very ethical message, a very straightforward message that, we are here to maintain highest level of financial governance. Yeah.
And an interesting point, the feedback loop, because so often people think that investor conference is more to talk to the investors and tell them what you're doing, rather than listening to them to know what they want to say to you as well, right?
Absolutely.
So, Mark, you made a very interesting point about the global north. I mean, we typically hear about the global south. So it was pretty interesting that, you talked about the global north. You have the experience of developed countries as well as seeing developing countries. So with that hat on, and the fact that we're also looking at the combination of some of the investors in those markets coming into our markets, what's the advice you have for us?
So for perspective, when I talk about global north and global south, I left the global north nearly 30 years ago, having seen that the global south was the future, albeit perhaps Singapore isn't the most obvious place to talk about global south. But exactly. But it's a really good point. This idea that the opportunities that are driven at the moment coming out of, as you know, Venkat, I spent a lot of my time in Southeast Asia, China. I've done work in India for the last more than 15 years, and to see what's coming out of Africa as well at the moment, and the flows of capital that are coming through. I can't remember if I mentioned earlier, but I live in Dubai now. And to see the power and those flows of capital that are now avoiding going through the traditional global north, the powerhouse Western markets, particularly when you think of the big European markets, the US is incredible. The FDI, the capital has to flow to markets that are efficient, transparent, and offer a greater return for the risk that's being taken than any other market. So that's the global north perspective. It's really it's that simple. Now, one of the things that I think Trump is trying to do at the moment is target that and really demonstrate that he can drive up the attractiveness of the US for both US business and for inward investment into the US. To counter that, where the global south needs to be, is to say, so what can we do around the efficient operation of markets, the standards, the leadership we've talked about, the transparency and ethics that will give confidence to business that the risk-reward return is worth taking in the markets that are formed in the global south. The challenge is that some of those relationships within the global south are not so well formed, and I think as Monica mentioned earlier, I think India is in a great space because of the natural rule of law, the English language, that entrepreneurial spirit, that vast population, but also it's because people have been doing investment into India for such a long time now. It may have come in many very different forms, but there's a level of confidence there. The danger, and India can show leadership here, the danger is that starting to link up to more peripherally aligned countries will turn off investment. And at a time when you've got such geopolitical pressures, you mentioned the difference between short term and long term, and that's when we think really short term, the conversations that we would have had when I was sat on this stage a year ago to where they are today because of what's happened in the US is phenomenal. But also, it doesn't feel as though this is just a 4-year thing in the US either. So there's every possibility, and certainly the time that I've spent over there in the last year or so, that this is a sea change of investment mentality and political, geopolitical change. So making sure that India leverages all the assets that it's got and staying attractive to those markets is really important, whilst giving leadership to the global south, because this is India's time. This is the opportunity to take that leadership position, but without aligning to parties that will just never reconcile back to what the North wants.
Thanks. No, it's an interesting point you raised, because I think that a lot of the alignments that will happen, it's not just going to be trade, it's going to be trade and defense together. So you will find that if you have Quad, you would look in terms of bilaterals with countries with whom you have. Secondly, multilateralism is dead. So there will be more and more bilaterals that will happen, and it will be trade and investment that will come together. So Hrishikesh, coming back to you, because you've got to tie this all together with technology, but I want to ask you the simple technology question, because nowadays I realize that the technology guys are the most important people on the planet. I mean, they are in the White House, they're everywhere, and they're pretty disruptive as well. I thought that technology is disruptive. Now I find that people who actually live on technology are disruptive. So, if you put your disruptive hat on, if you could just tell us what would disrupt investors in India, I think that's one piece of it. And the second thing is, how influenced do you think that our investors are by what happens daily on social media?
So let me just add to what everyone has said on the panel from a perspective of what we witness with startups. So I often joke now that the Global FinTech Fest and those sort of conferences have become almost like a Diwali family gathering, right? It's actually, for such a large country, it's a very small community. And some of the things you learn, right? There's tension between investor patience and transparency of reporting, right? And you see that particularly in startups. So, I mean, you have this change since we had the big tech guys evolve in the US, where they just buy up every form of competition of new emerging technologies in 3 years. What is translated, and this is just my perception, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's translated into a 3-year exit for every limited partner who invests in any fund, which then translates into someone wanting to invest somewhere and flip the investment in 3 years. And hence what happens is there's massive pressure to grow. When there's massive pressure to grow, two things happen, especially in the regulated spaces, especially financial services. People get into gray areas, fine line, do anything like the prepaid card, incident with the NBFC's funding, the spends on the prepaid cards was one example. What's happening with the P2P NBFCs now is the second example. So what happens is there's this impatience to grow, then the regulator like slaps something down, and then there's uproar, and it was always the law, right? So and the other, one of the personal experiences of this is, so if you had to go build a fintech infrastructure company in this country or anywhere in the world now, I think it's virtually impossible. Because most of these, I was there when CIBIL was formed, which was its version of infrastructure as a credit bureau in 2003-04. It took a 7-year runway for you to break even, and after that it was 30% growth 30% growth year on year with 50% margin. But who today will be patient for 7 years? And as a result of which, in listed markets, I understand margin, you're factoring in multiples and that sort of thing. But in unlisted markets, you hear founders even say that the investors tell them just to raise money so they can bump up the valuation and take a, carry check or whatever, right? So I think there's tension there, and I don't think it's resolvable. So actually what you've seen as a result, especially in India, is a lot of the fintech innovation is now pushed into the public sectors, which is the reason I'm there, right? Because for what we are trying to do, I don't think there's anywhere, other than if it's a family office, and I'll name, I think Rain Matter Zerodha talks about being patient capital in long term, or it'll come out of the Geos or the Godreges who are willing to invest in the long term, right? So that's one. Now, in terms of disruption, right? Look, when we talk to people, so we, especially at ONDC, it's a very peculiar experiment. I say we're only 3 years old. We are not for profit, we are backed for the government, and we are strangely a company that exists to make other people money, right? So we, yes, while we'll need to make money ourselves eventually to pay folks like me who work there, but the idea is to generate more value. The way we try to think about it is, imagine India as a city, as a country without roads, right? We talk about physical infra that connects the roads which drive commerce. I think the Mumbai-Pune Expressway is a great example. 25 years ago, when it was first laid, there was just jungle on both sides. Now the Pune bypass itself is a city, right? So that's what the infrastructure does. But strangely, I think, we get viewed two ways. In the business or risk discussions of large incumbents, you're like, yeah, what is the risk of them coming? How do we get disrupted? The mid-size and challenger companies say, oh great, they're coming, we'll get more distribution or we'll have access to supply we previously didn't have. So they see it as an opportunity. So I think for the message to the dominant incumbents is not so much how we're going to affect them, but how we can help, right? So I love giving the example of UPI in this because, everyone thought the credit card would die. Now who will ever use credit cards anymore? And, I was in the credit bureau, so I could tell you in 2016-17, there were only 25 million credit card holders in the country, right? And now there are, I think, 70 or 80 million credit cards. So it's not like it hasn't grown. And parallelly, you had UPI introduce 400 million new people who are digitally transacting. As a byproduct of that, you have now digital track, which now lenders are able to give loans against, which creates credit track, which then gets the whole cycle going, right? So the point is, right, so, everyone asks us, does Amazon, Flipkart, are they going to participate? And actually the answer today is no, because we can't bring something to them. But there will be a time, right? So today you have to have a GST registration to participate on Amazon because, they put you through this whole rigmarole. And that excludes most of the other people who are not registered for GST, right? Because even today, if you just have to pay GST as a consultant, maybe your accountant will charge you 30,000 rupees a year. Now, someone making 2 lakhs of revenue a year is not going to want to pay that, right? So what I think will happen is when our hardest job is digitizing those guys, right? When those people get digitized and start selling, and look, are there issues with our process today? Yes, there are. 20 years ago, if someone had asked Amazon, are you delivering things exactly on time? The answer would be no, right? So I think we get compared, we're still, whilst again, it's Government of India, Ministry of Commerce initiative, we are still only 3 years old and we will shape and we will iterate and we will get it right and there's will to do it, right? Comes back to the original point, we have runway. So if you ask me, and we publish even on our website data which is open, it's aggregated data, but this is our performance, good, bad, yes, put more pressure on us to get it right. But that's what we need to do because there's patient capital. And I say patient capital is not that there's not pressure and reviews of the government and saying, "Kyun nahi ho raha hai," and all that good stuff. But there's still this understanding that will take time. So I think if investors are not able to be a little more patient, you're going to see this. So there's this tension, and it's an art, not a science. And nobody knows what the right balance is, but the more pressure there is for returns, eventually there'll be more, times when something is misreported or people cross the line.
Thanks. So live with the natural tensions. Yeah. So, Shobit, how much time do we have on the panel? Can I take questions from the audience? Yeah. So maybe I'll just throw it open because I know that we're short of time and we can go on for some time, but I'd be more interested in getting questions from folks here. Yeah, I see the lady back there. If you could just... Can I throw this to you? There is that mic, if you can throw.
Good afternoon to one and all present here. I'm Dr. C.A. Vibhas Singh. I have a question for Swaminathan sir. Hello, sir.
Hi.
Sir, you just talked about absolute transparency, and we have understood so far that for financial governance, transparency is the central. But I would like to understand how any organization in general, or Godrej Industries in particular, balance transparency and confidentiality so much so as to not to affect trust building with the investors.
Okay. So when you're talking about confidentiality, that is more intrinsic to an organization. For example, if you're doing an R&D research, you're not revealing what you're actually producing. The investor also is very mature in not getting into details of how are you doing a research. What is it going to ultimately impact the investor, the organization, the country, the user of that product is much more valuable than what it will do. They will also want to know, for example, if you're coming with, say, a green technology, is it really going to be, does it affect the environment? Does it have any impact? So there is a difference between what an organization will do within its system, which is confidential, to what the investor will know. So the transparent part is the intent of the organization and what is it is delivering. Is it delivering what it is committed to its principles, and is it delivering with absolute level of credibility?
So data governance is only limited to R&D?
No, anything. If you, for example, a new launch, a new product that you are trying to do, new technology you are introducing. So anything which is back-end, but the outcome of it should be in line with the broader principles an organization is set up for. You're not really doing a research which is against the principles of an organization. To that extent, that comfort level an investor would want will certainly need to be told.
Yeah, two more questions.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Monica, so this NAP trade, I was reading that you'll be tying up with World Bank for, you talked about 10, 20, 30-year loans. You'll be looking at 40, 50-year loans, and also you will request them to participate on this enhancement of credit. That is one. Second is, of course, we have CDPQ, chairman is here. You said you went and met some institutions from USA. Canadian pension funds have invested a lot in India, that's one. Now, apart from that, Abu Dhabi, and now we are tying up with European FTA. They are the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. So you are planning to speak to all these wealth funds and bring them here on your platform?
Second question first. So, bringing somebody to invest in a AAA rated bond domestically, probably they are not in. They need that delta. That is what I talked about. So that is why they are not probably in an institution which is probably AAA rated in a very high number, but they are in the institutions which are on the other side of the table, the developers. When we talked about road assets, when we talked about InvITs, when we talked about renewable energy, they are there in those assets. So for us, of course, the benefit of talking to them is what are they expecting? What kind of investor should we enhance the rating for? So that they are able to come and, jump the queue to come to India. So that was a thought. The second part of, World Bank giving us a guarantee. So what the product is like, it is particularly optimizing my own capital. So if I have to enhance a credit rating of 1,000 crore of bonds, say 20% credit rating, 20% enhancement has to be done. That means I'm taking 200 crores of risk on that. If it is backstopped by another institution, my capital requirement goes down. So that is the kind of transaction we are trying to enter with the World Bank, so that with this limited amount of capital which we have in the country, we are able to optimize better for, leverage better for the growth of infrastructure, what is needed.
Final question.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mahesh Bhatt, consultant on values and ethics-based governance and risk compliances. RBI has lots of governance, SEBI has governances, but in spite of so many, regulations and all, the recent one of New India Cooperative Bank scam, where old chairman, along with his colleagues, siphons out crores of rupees, and a depositor has been told to sign an insurance form just within a month of a scam or 1.5 months of a scam. And gullible fixed deposit holders are signing the papers. What sort of guidance your committee or CII would like to give to the authorities?
So look, what you've touched upon is, very controversial, very hard for anyone to answer other than the RBI in this particular case. But look, the regulator, the rules are clear. It's almost like asking, there's a law in the country, someone breaks the law, so what do you do about it? So, they come in when there's a fire. I think there were some 2,000-3,000 registered NBFCs, 300 commercial banks. Anyway, and there's this, I come back to tension between the market and the regulator saying there's over-regulation currently. If you hear on the ground, and I'm able to speak because I'm no longer in a regulated entity per se, but there are the undertones that there's over-regulation, RBI audits going on all the time, but will a few slip through the cracks? Most likely, right? Especially usually the larger ones get audited and the smaller ones get audited later. When there's collusion between a bank employee and one of the customers and money is siphoned off, it's happened at the highest levels of institutions as well. At some point you can put all the guardrails if you want, but if people collude to do it, in my opinion, there's not much you can do. But then you have the law, so you put them away, right? You could then also argue not everybody's put away. But beyond the point, I think we've gotten better at doing that as well. So people run away and then are not able to come back. But we've not got to the stage where we're putting them away in the country, I think, as yet.
Yeah, but I think the important takeaway I have from that is while we keep talking about value creation, we have to also see that is there accountability when there is value destruction. That point, sir, I do take. So I think with this, let's just close this session and thank you very much. I won't take the risk of announcing what's next because I don't know what's next. I leave that to Shobit to do it again. Thank you.